Dr. Maya Richardson spent years proving herself in the ER, only to be dismissed by Officer Greg Malloy as not a real doctor. His arrogance cut deeply, mocking her dedication with sneers about diversity hires. But when fate struck and Malloy collapsed in cardiac arrest, it was Maya's steady hands that brought him back. And just wait until you hear how that single moment turned humiliation into undeniable triumph, and why justice ultimately prevailed. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Emergency Department flickered faintly, buzzing overhead as the midnight shift pressed forward. Doctors moved quickly, nurses whispered to one another in clipped tones, and the rhythm of heart monitors pulsed through the air. Amid the organized chaos, Dr. Maya Richardson stood at the center of it all. She had already worked 12 hours that day, her second double shift in a row. Her body begged for rest, but her mind remained sharp. Years of training had shaped her into one of the most reliable physicians on staff. Colleagues trusted her judgment without question, patients left with gratitude in their eyes, and yet she knew all too well that not everyone who walked through those doors saw her the same way. To some, her title as doctor seemed unbelievable, as though her presence in that role was a mistake. That reality came crashing down harder than ever one Saturday night. The automatic doors hissed open, and the room stiffened. Officer Greg Malloy marched inside with heavy steps, gripping a man in handcuffs. The suspect's shirt was stained, and he looked dazed, but it was clear the officer cared little for triage or protocol. His eyes scanned the room with impatience, his jaw set, his voice booming like he owned the space. "Where's the doctor?" he demanded. The charge nurse motioned toward Maya, who was reviewing a chart at the counter. Calmly, she set down her pen, straightened her shoulders, and approached. "I'm Dr. Richardson. What's the situation?" For a split second there was silence. Then it came. The laugh. Loud, sharp, dismissive. The officer shook his head, his expression dripping with disbelief. "Don't play games with me. I asked for the doctor, not the nurse." The words cut through the room like glass. Conversations died mid-sentence. A technician froze with a tray in hand. A resident shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Every eye darted to Maya, waiting to see how she would respond. Inside her chest, a storm raged. She had faced comments before, subtle ones, careless ones, the kind that chipped away slowly at her dignity. But this was different. This was not subtle. This was open rejection of everything she had earned, everything she had sacrificed years of her life to achieve. She wanted to fire back, to remind him of the years she had studied while others slept, the countless nights spent in hospitals, the exams she had passed with excellence. She wanted to remind him that she had chosen this path to heal, not to be doubted, mocked, or stripped of her title in front of her team. But her training reminded her control, composure. The patient must come first. "I am the attending physician on duty tonight," she repeated, her voice steady, though her pulse quickened. Malloy smirked, unconvinced. He glanced at the handcuffed man, then back at her, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "If you say so." Around them, the staff shifted awkwardly, as though trapped between two worlds, the one where they knew Maya as their leader, and the one where prejudice still dictated perception. And in that silence, anger simmered in Maya's chest. Not just anger for herself, anger for every time someone who looked like her had been dismissed. Anger for every little girl who dreamed of becoming a doctor but would grow up hearing that she didn't belong. Anger for the fact that no matter how many lives she saved, no matter how many degrees hung on her wall, there would always be someone like Officer Malloy ready to strip it all away with a laugh. She steadied her breath. The patient needed care. But as she turned to take charge of the situation, one thought refused to leave her mind. Tonight, the insult burned deeper than before. Tonight, it wasn't just about her pride, it was about dignity. And in that moment, beneath the buzzing lights of St. Mary's, Dr. Maya Richardson silently promised herself that she would let her actions, not his mockery, speak the loudest. Dr. Maya Richardson did what she always did in moments like this. She pushed her emotions down and focused on the patient. The suspect, Officer Malloy, had dragged into the ER, was bleeding from a deep wound, his pulse faint, his breaths shallow. Without hesitation, Maya slipped on her gloves, called out instructions, and took control of the room. "Get me 2 large-bore IVs. I want fluids running wide open. Let's prep for imaging," she ordered. Her team moved instantly because they trusted her. They didn't need to second-guess her decisions. They had seen her save lives time and time again, often under more chaotic conditions than this. But as she bent over the stretcher, clamping bleeding vessels and guiding her residents through the steps, she could feel Officer Malloy's eyes on her like a weight. He stood near the doorway, arms crossed, leaning against the wall with a smug expression. His lips curled in a smirk that seemed permanent, like he was watching a performance he didn't buy into. And then, without lowering his voice, he muttered, "Unbelievable." This is what passes for a doctor these days? Must be one of those diversity hires. The words pierced her focus like a knife. For a moment, her hands almost faltered. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Around her, the staff exchanged uneasy glances, but no one said a word. Maya swallowed hard and kept going. The patient mattered. He needed her. She tightened a tourniquet, called for suction, adjusted the angle of the gurney. Every move was precise, calm, practiced. But inside, something ached. Not fear. She wasn't afraid of Malloy. She had dealt with louder, tougher men in her career. What she felt was something heavier, pain. The pain of knowing that in his eyes, all her years of sacrifice meant nothing. The late nights hunched over textbooks in medical school, the endless rotations that had left her too exhausted to eat, the moments when she doubted if she would ever make it. All of that erased in an instant by a smirk and a comment. He didn't see her skill. He didn't see her dedication. He didn't even see her humanity. He saw only a stereotype. She wanted to believe it didn't matter, that she could brush it off the way she had so many times before. But in the sterile brightness of that ER, as she worked tirelessly to save a stranger, it stung. Because it wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had been dismissed, Every professional whose worth had been questioned for reasons that had nothing to do with ability. The suspect stabilized under her care. His bleeding slowed, his color improved, his breathing evened out. By the time he was wheeled upstairs for surgery, Maya knew she had given him the best chance possible. Another life hanging by a thread, pulled back by her steady hands. And yet, when the gurney rolled away and the doors swung closed, she didn't feel the usual rush of relief that came with stabilizing a patient. Instead, she felt drained, hollow, because behind her, Officer Malloy still wore that smirk, as if her work proved nothing, as if her title was still a joke. Maya stepped into the hallway, peeling off her gloves. She pressed her back against the cool wall, closing her eyes for a moment. The voices of the ER faded, leaving only the echo of his words in her mind. Diversity hire. Quota, her chest tightened, not with fear, but with the weight of that judgment. How many times would she have to prove herself? How many times would she have to be twice as good just to be seen as enough? For a few moments, she let herself feel it, the pain, raw and undeniable. Then she took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to return to the floor. But just as she steadied herself, a sudden commotion erupted behind her. Shouts, the sound of something heavy hitting the ground. Maya turned quickly, and there, crumpled on the polished floor of the ER, was Officer Greg Malloy. Fate had intervened. Greg Malloy slumped to the floor. For a second, no one moved. Some of the nurses thought he was pulling another cruel stunt, mocking or exaggerating the way he had mocked Maya just minutes before. But then his complexion shifted. A pallor spread across his face, his breathing faltered, and beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. The laughter died. Panic crept into the room. "Officer down!" one of his colleagues shouted, rushing forward. Two more uniformed men froze, uncertain, fear etched across their faces. The ER, usually a symphony of controlled urgency, was suddenly filled with shouts and chaos. And then, instinctively, every eye turned back to Maya. The same woman he had dismissed, belittled, and ridiculed was now the only one who could save him. Maya didn't waste a heartbeat. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands already moving to his neck, searching for a pulse. Nothing. The stillness beneath her fingertips confirmed what her training had already told her. "Crash cart! Now!" she commanded, her voice slicing through the noise with sharp authority. "He's in cardiac arrest. Start compressions." The team responded instantly, galvanized by her clarity. A nurse positioned herself at Malloy's chest, beginning the rhythmic push of compressions. Maya stayed close, calling out the cadence, guiding every move. Her voice, firm and unwavering, anchored the room. Inside, she felt the storm of conflicting emotions. His cruelty, her pain, the sting of humiliation still fresh. But none of that mattered now. This was not about her pride, not about his prejudice. This was about life, fragile and fleeting, and the oath she had sworn to protect it. "Charge to 200, she instructed as the crash cart arrived. Gell was spread on the paddles, the machine humming to life. Maya took control, her eyes locked on Malloy's chest. "Clear!" The shock jolted his body, a violent reminder of the fight between death and survival. The monitors beeped, flat, then erratic, then flat again. No pulse. The officers by the door watched in stunned silence, the reality crashing in. The man they followed was slipping away, and the only person standing between him and the unthinkable was the doctor he had mocked. "Resume compressions. Push epinephrine," Maya ordered. Sweat dripped down her temple, but her focus never wavered. The minutes stretched like hours. Every second mattered. The room moved because she moved. Nurses, residents, technicians, all guided by her presence. Another round, another shock, another silence that felt eternal. "Come on, breathe," she whispered under her breath, so softly no one else could hear. Her hands hovered, steady, ready. Then, at last, a flicker, a blip on the monitor, weak, unstable, but there, a fragile rhythm trying to hold. Maya leaned in, checking again for a pulse. This time, faint but undeniable, she felt it. "He's back," she said firmly, her voice carrying both relief and restraint. A wave of tension released from the room. The officers exhaled, some bowing their heads, others gripping the backs of chairs as though steadying themselves. The patient, a man who moments earlier had mocked the very idea of her being a doctor, was alive because she had refused to see him as anything less than human. The nurses wheeled Malloy toward the ICU, his breathing assisted, his heart tenuously stable. As the doors swung closed behind him, silence lingered in the ER. Not the silence of despair, but the silence of awe. Maya straightened slowly, peeling off her gloves. Her chest rose and fell with measured breaths, her composure returning as if she had just finished any other case. But those who had watched knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. She had answered cruelty with compassion, disrespect with skill, dismissal with undeniable proof, and in that moment, hope filled the space. Not just hope for a single man's survival, but hope that integrity and humanity could shine even in the darkest encounters. Minutes passed like hours. The steady rhythm on the monitor grew stronger, each beat a fragile but undeniable declaration of life. Officer Greg Malloy stirred, his eyelids fluttering open. His gaze shifted across the room, confusion painted across his features. The arrogance he had worn so comfortably earlier that evening was gone, replaced with something unfamiliar, something unguarded. Maya stood at his bedside, her posture straight, though exhaustion pulled at her shoulders. Sweat glistened at her brow, her breath still uneven from the intensity of the resuscitation. She had given every ounce of focus, every reserve of skill to pull him back from the brink. And now, against all odds, he was alive. Their eyes met. For the first time that night, Malloy did not see her as a figure to ridicule, nor as someone to dismiss. His gaze held something new, stunned respect, reluctant but real. The silence in the room deepened, almost reverent. Nurses paused. Residents who had witnessed the entire ordeal seemed frozen in place. Even Malloy's fellow officers, who had stood in stoic solidarity behind him before, now looked shaken. They had seen more than a medical procedure. They had seen a truth revealed with clarity sharper than words. Maya didn't lecture him. She didn't demand acknowledgement or apology. That wasn't who she was. Instead, she leaned in, her voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of both her duty and her humanity. "You're going to be okay." The words were simple, yet in that moment they carried more power than any rebuke. They were both reassurance and statement, a reminder that compassion had spoken louder than cruelty. Malloy blinked, his lips parting as if he wanted to speak, but no sound came. For once he had no retort, no sarcasm, only silence. Word spread quickly through the halls of St. Mary's. Staff members whispered in break rooms, in corridors, by the nurses' station. The story was retold again and again. The officer who mocked the black doctor, only to have his life saved by her steady hands. Each retelling carried both outrage at the injustice and awe at the resolution. It wasn't just about medicine, it was about character. For Maya, the moment was not about vindication. She didn't walk through the hospital expecting applause. Her pride didn't swell with triumph. Instead, she returned to her duties, moving to the next patient, then the next, as she always did. Her heart was steady because she knew why she had chosen this life. Not to prove herself to anyone, but to heal, to help, to protect life where she could. But for those who had witnessed it, the image of that night remained vivid. The injustice had burned. The pain of hearing her dismissed, diminished, cut deeply. Yet the triumph they saw, the way she responded with grace, composure, and extraordinary skill, was unforgettable. It inspired nurses to stand taller, residents to chase excellence, and even seasoned doctors to reflect on their own resilience in the face of judgment. The lesson wasn't one Malloy could erase, nor one the officers could deny. It didn't need a courtroom or punishment or even public reprimand. The truth had been displayed plainly for all to see. Sometimes justice doesn't come through consequence. Sometimes it arrives through undeniable truth. And the truth that night was etched into every heart present. The woman mocked for her very identity was the one who gave life back to the man who ridiculed her. Maya's strength, her calm, and her compassion rose above prejudice, and in doing so, she transformed pain into hope and hope into inspiration. That was her triumph. And it belonged not just to her, but to everyone who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or doubted.